Smart Silver Stacker live streams Friday afternoon. We're going to talk about why the U.S. economy, as it crumbles, we're very likely to see silver and also gold, the precious metals, soaring. And there is ample evidence around us to suggest that the U.S. economy is in bad shape, that it is possibly on the verge of a major collapse or a major restructuring. And there's a lot of folks in the mainstream who don't seem to want to acknowledge this fact, but we did receive further evidence today of that fact with the ongoing collapse of First Republic Bank. So, First Republic Bank, we've been watching the share price collapse all week. There have been concerns that they are seeing too many deposit outflows, something like $100 billion in Q1 of 2023, and the markets do not like this. It's indicative that they're going to have to sell some of their assets to make up the difference for these deposit outflows, and very likely they're going to have to do it at a loss. Well, now none of that really matters anymore because it's looking like First Republic is going to go into FDIC receivership. And this is kind of what we can expect in this massively over leveraged economy in an environment of raising rates. But that's not the only reason that the precious metals are going to soar. We will talk a little bit more about why the Fed has no choice here as we're seeing the banks continue to fail in pivoting and creating more currency to buoy up this economy. But there's plenty else going on in the world that is going to require the Fed to fire up the printing presses and to devalue the currency. And all of that means that the price, at least in dollar terms, of precious metals like gold and silver, they're going to be going much higher. I'm going to look at the comments here briefly. We've got a few folks saying hello in the chat. Hello, thank you for joining. Trombone Music says, do you think bank runs will increase or will the money flow to the bigger banks? Well, I think we're going to see smaller banks like First Republic continue to see outflows because investors, or depositors rather, they're concerned that maybe their bank isn't big enough to get political favors, to get bailouts from the government and from the central banks and from the Treasury and from the FDIC. And so they will continue to remove funds from smaller banks like First Republic and put them into the behemoths, the banks of Bank of America, the JP Morgans. And I think that this is going to continue to be a problem as long as rates stay elevated because all of these banks have U.S. Treasuries with these low yields on their books, something like $1.7 trillion worth of losses that have not been realized. That's according to a report from Fortune. And depositors understand that this is a risk to keep your money in a small bank. And that means they are going to continue to be pulling their money out of these small banks, probably flocking to big banks and thinking, well, hey, there's no way that the FDIC is going to let, JP Morgan or a giant, too big to fail institution go under. But the problem in there is, and what I think people don't realize is that, first of all, it's very likely you're going to see bailouts for smaller institutions. I mean, we've already seen that. Maybe not for shareholders of these banks, but for depositors, even if they exceed the FDIC limit, which I believe is still in effect, still $250,000, although we know that it didn't mean anything when we saw First Republic Bank and Signature Bank, or sorry, not First Republic, but SVB. When we saw SVB fail, the depositors were all made whole, regardless of whether or not their deposits exceeded the shareholder limits or not. They all were made whole. So, the FDIC cap is basically meaningless, although technically still in effect. But the thing is, even if, say, a big bank like JP Morgan were to fail and it were to get bailed out, well, yeah, you're going to get your money. But the thing you have to understand here is that the money's not safe because you're going to be getting money that has been significantly devalued, that has significantly declined in purchasing power. Because the only way that a major institution like a JP Morgan or like a Bank of America could ever get bailed out is for massive amounts of money to be created. The FDIC doesn't have trillions of dollars to dole out to these troubled institutions with these bad assets on their books. Likely what we're going to see is an expansion of the BTFP or something like that, the Bank Term Funding Program, where the Fed allows these banks to put up these treasuries that have these unrealized losses as collateral for loans, and the Fed basically absorbs the losses because, I mean, why would these banks ever, pay back the loan to get their collateral back. They don't want these assets in the first place. They're these assets that have all these losses. And, the currency is just going to get devalued. So it's safe, I guess, in one sense, in that you have it in the bank and you're going to get the paper coupons, the notes, but they're not going to be able to buy anything. And this is exactly like what Alan Greenspan warned us about in congressional testimony back in, I think, in 2005. He said, we have a system, you can guarantee these cash payments in any amount, but you can't guarantee their purchasing power. Now, he was referring to Social Security, and that's a whole other Ponzi scheme of its own. But the same thing applies to these banks because you can always guarantee that the depositors will have their nominal currency deposits secured, but you can't guarantee that that currency is going to buy anything if you do bail them out and you make the depositors whole. And so that's the real problem here. And as we're seeing First Republic Bank collapsing, this is not going to be the last one. This will be the third major bank failure, and it's almost guaranteed now. They're saying this is going into FDIC receivership. I believe the shares, they dropped another 50% or something like that today. Back in February, this bank was trading at over $100 a share. Today it was around $3.50. So, let that sink in. This is a huge amount of wealth that has been erased. And we're going to see more of this as long as the Fed keeps hiking rates and as long as they keep rates elevated. Now, rates right now, they're still, in a historical sense, quite low, and that means it's inflationary. But the thing is that we've already got so much debt as a result of interest rates being held so low for so long that even these rates, even this small hike by the Fed, it was rapid, the hike up, but still the absolute level of rates very low. We don't even technically have real rates yet. We've still got the CPI at 5%, something like that. And the Fed funds rate is 4 and something. So still negative real rates. But already we're starting to see the banking system collapse and fall apart. And so it's very likely that we're going to continue to see these problems crop up and manifest themselves. These institutions are going to get bailed out, but trust me, you're not going to hear this called a bailout. The Fed is going to put something together, I'm sure, for First Republic, but it's going to be anything but a bailout because they don't want to acknowledge that they have already essentially pivoted because, that's what's going on here. They still want to have the illusion going that they're fighting inflation and that they're trying to get inflation down to their 2% target. But really, nothing could be further from the truth. We already know that they've begun expanding their balance sheet again, and it's only a matter of time until they begin slashing rates once again. And maybe it'll be one of those major financial institutions that has to collapse before that happens, but I don't think so. And one of the other reasons that we are very likely to see much more money printing, not only domestically do we have this problem with the banks and with the economy just kind of falling apart as we go here, and the US's inability to withstand these rate hikes because of the amount of leverage. We've also got the global de-dollarization trend that's going on, and that is just a part of a much bigger conflict. We're living in 2023. We're on the verge of a major global war. This war has already started. I think that when you look back from a historical perspective, they will say World War III began maybe in 2022. I don't know exactly what the date they're going to put on it. Maybe the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Maybe they'll take it back to 2014, that earlier conflict, and it'll be looked at as like a decades-long conflict or something like that. But we are already in the midst of it. And war is extremely expensive. That is the thing that we have to keep in mind here. We are already running more than a $2 trillion annual deficit. The Treasury tells us that in the first 6 months of fiscal year 2023, the U.S. ran a $1.1 trillion deficit. Now, a lot of that has to do with debt service cost on the national debt because we have this enormous national debt of $31.7 trillion. And when you start hiking rates and you have that much debt, it becomes a problem. Debt service quickly can become the biggest item on the national budget if we go too high on rates. Probably if we were to go high enough on interest rates to actually get the inflation problem under control, it's very likely that that would happen, that the debt service cost would become the most expensive thing the federal government's got going on. More than the defense budget, more than Social Security, more than Medicare. We're not there yet, but it is rising. And when this conflict really kicks off, the amount of spending is going to dwarf what we're witnessing right now. We know war is one of the most inflationary things that can happen. And just look what's going on in Taiwan right now. We've got proxy war stuff brewing all over the world. China, they just flew an uncrewed combat aircraft around Taiwan to show that they could strike any side of the island nation, or if you know you're a CCP shill, the rebellious province, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I don't really have a dog in that fight, to be honest. I'm from the U.S. I think that we should abide by the admonitions of President Washington and not embroil ourselves in these foreign conflicts. But then again, the world is much different than it was when he made that statement. So it's kind of hard to say. But, you know, I'm talking about stacking silver and protecting ourselves financially. The geopolitical drama and what, you know, the U.S. role in that is kind of above my pay grade, and I don't have any say in it anyway. So the best thing I can do is just observe what's going on and try to prepare myself appropriately. We've also got a conflict brewing in Sudan now. Apparently, it's becoming kind of tricky to evacuate the Americans from there. I mean, that seems to be a hallmark of this administration. When things go bad around the world, whether it's in Afghanistan or Sudan, whatever, we have a hard time extracting the Americans who are stuck there. Meanwhile, the Chinese are sending naval vessels there to extract their citizens from Sudan. But that's another place where law and order and peace are breaking down. We've got Syria, you got U.S. troops there fighting Iranian-backed militias. You've got, well, I guess one bright spot is that we've got Iran and Saudi Arabia making peace, a Chinese-sponsored peace deal. But the problem with that is that that's all in preparation for them to join the BRICS nations and destroy the petrodollar. So that's not a good thing for the dollar, although maybe it's good for, you know, world peace or whatever you want to talk about. That's not something we're going to see until, you know, this fourth turning is over, I don't think. And we've got a much bigger conflict brewing as we move along here. Also, you know, the war in Ukraine's not over, of course. We've got in Ukraine, British troops have been given depleted uranium, or rather, I'm sorry, the British have given Ukrainian troops depleted uranium munitions for their tanks. Now, I'm not a military guy, I'm not an expert on this, but what the Russians have told us is that they will view the use of this type of munition as equivalent to the use of a dirty bomb. And there's some evidence that the use of depleted munitions, depleted uranium munitions, does lead to some lingering radioactivity, higher cancer rates, that sort of thing. So, not a good development over in Ukraine. And if they're viewing this as the equivalent of a dirty bomb being used, I mean, this is bringing us one step closer to a tactical nuclear exchange, possibly a nuclear Armageddon. I know a lot of people say, hey, if we get a nuclear war breaking out, it doesn't matter if you're stacking gold or silver because it's not going to do you much good because everyone's going to die. Well, listen, you could have a tactical nuclear exchange in Ukraine that doesn't lead to a nuclear Armageddon, but can you imagine what would happen to world markets if something like that happened? I mean, that would be an extremely ominous development, and it could very likely be a blow to this house of cards global economy that we have, or it's not just the US. I mean, most Western nations, even China, they have a lot of debt. I think the Chinese debt to GDP ratio is something like 80%. You know, when we talk about de-dollarization in China and stuff, a lot of people tell me, well, the Chinese economy is screwed too. Like, well, okay. That doesn't mean that I don't want to have metal. I've already mentioned that I don't think stacking Chinese yuan is a good idea, a good alternative to the dollar. You know, stick to gold and silver. But just because other countries' economies are basket cases too, that doesn't mean that the U.S. economy is doing any better. Hey, do me a favor if you're watching, smash that like button. Say hello in the chat. Helps get this out through the algorithm. And you know, with global World War III, banking crisis brewing, I am absolutely still stacking gold and silver. Right now, I think SD Bullion has a sale on Austrian Philharmonics. They've got those for $3.79 over spot, I believe, and they've also got 1 ounce bars, any quantity pricing. I did a video earlier this week, or maybe it was last week, about stacking gold and silver on a budget, and those any quantity deals are something you want to keep an eye out for. Ron John says, yesterday silver will crash, today silver will soar. Yeah, well, listen, different timetables we're talking about. In terms of silver pulling back, I do think that there is a strong likelihood that in the near future, we could see a significant pullback in the price of the precious metals just because the US dollar has had such a incredibly steep decline over the past 6 months. It's kind of become oversold. And so I think that we are going to see the US dollar perhaps have a bit of a dead cat bounce or a bear market rally, whatever you want to call it, and that could put some pressure on the precious metals. Now, I don't even know if the price of physical drop if we see that. It might, and then you might have the opportunity to get some of this stuff at a discount. But in the long run, the dollar is toast. You know, we got global de-dollarization. We're on the verge of World War III. World War III, you know, if that breaks out, if we actually get involved in a conflict, whether it be in the Taiwan or if NATO troops are getting deployed in Ukraine or anywhere around the world, uh, we're already spending a lot of money on these conflicts. You know, we're sending billions and billions of dollars of military aid to Ukraine. It's essentially a proxy war. And I don't even know if you can call this a proxy war because typically in a proxy war, you'd have two sides fighting, and then you'd have the major combatants kind of backing each side. Like in Vietnam, for example, you had the North Vietnamese backed by the Soviet Union and China, and then you had the South Vietnamese backed by the US. But in Ukraine, it's not really even a proxy war anymore because you get the US backing Ukraine, but they're fighting the Russians. It's not like they're fighting some third party that the Russians are backing. I mean, this is very close to a direct conflict. It essentially is a direct conflict between NATO and Russia at this point, and they have said that they view it as much. And so it's only a matter of time before this plays out and gets very, very expensive for the U.S. taxpayer. We already had the largest defense budget in history recently passed, and that is just going to be a trend that moves up. In fact, military spending is increasing around the world, you know, in a very, very big way. So, you know, you want to be taking care of all your preparations here, getting some silver for the inevitable collapse, it looks like, of the banking system. Now, I do want to point out also that I think in the thumbnail, I put the words no choice, and I haven't even explained what that means yet. The reason I put no choice in the thumbnail that you saw, that you clicked on to get into this video, is because the Fed is going to have their hands tied as this collapse plays out. As we see banks like First Republic Bank collapsing, and hold on, I'm gonna go to the chat here. Something caught my eye. Is your ring titanium or tungsten? My ring is silicon. Emmett, I want to answer Emmett's question because Emmett posts all the time. I know he watches a lot of these videos. Thanks, Emmett. Shout out. What is your take? All right, the chat is fading in and out on this mobile thing. I'm still getting the hang of this. Although, hey, listen, I did manage to get the screen in landscape mode this time, so an improvement on the streams. Anyway, I'm going to be putting out some more of the regularly produced videos, so don't worry if you are not a huge fan of these live streams. I've just kind of been on a live stream kick lately, and I think they're kind of fun because I get to chat with you guys. Um, Emmett said something about COMEX vaults. Looks like they have more silver. Okay, the COMEX, the open interest there, you know, it represents significantly more physical silver than they have. Now, they do have the registered and then the eligible, if I'm not mistaken, at the COMEX. So in the registered, you have the stuff that's immediately available off the shelf to give to settle a contract. The eligible is allegedly silver that is in a warehouse that can be turned into registered by, you know, pushing some paper across a desk. But if you look at the COMEX documents, there's a document from the CME group. I've put it in videos before. I obviously don't have it here right in front of me, but there's a document that you can find with a little Google foo if you go back and you find the video I made on this topic about how the COMEX themselves, the CME group, they say that 50% of their eligible silver is actually already claimed. So it's not really eligible for anything. Somebody already has a claim to that. And this is not like a conspiracy theory. I mean, this is from a document on their own website. I think I found out about it from Bullion Star, you know, blog that covers this kind of thing. And so they have an article on this as well. But yeah, I don't think there's that much silver at the COMEX. It was JP Morgan, I think, who recently had, I don't know if it was the COMEX or the LME. I think it was the LME, but they had a warehouse where they thought they had a couple $1 million worth of nickel, and it turned out it was just rocks. And so, yes, Steve just put that in the chat. He says, I trust the COMEX supply as much as I trust the bags of nickel that turned out to be rocks. Exactly. Unless you hold it, you know, you don't own it. And so I'm very leery of silver ETF, silver futures contract, any of these paper derivatives of silver, because I really don't believe there's enough metal to back them up to any significant degree. And, you know, in normal market situations, normal market times, that's probably not that big of a deal, and it's not going to be a problem. But the thing is that you don't really even need the precious metals until market conditions are unusual, until you have some kind of a crisis or a collapse. And that's the kind of time that you're not going to be able to get your silver from your COMEX silver contract. So, you know, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. That is a fact. Somebody said, what price would you sell your silver maples for right now? Well, listen, like I've never really sold any silver myself. I hang on to every ounce. And, my plan is to either sell it after a drastic appreciation in dollar terms or swap it out for some other hard assets, or maybe just hold it until the next financial paradigm. If we really see the dollar lose its world reserve status and maybe just a complete transition. I know that sounds kind of pie in the sky. People will say that'll never happen, but it's happened many times throughout history, and just because it probably isn't going to happen this year, that doesn't mean that 5 years down the road, a lot can happen in 5 years. Think about 2018, where we were back then. No pandemic, no World War III, none of this stuff. So, a tremendous amount of change can occur in a short period of time, and we're in one of these fourth turning things. If you haven't read that, if you're not familiar with that book, check out the book The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe. Talk about their generational theory. They make a lot of very eerie predictions considering the fact that that book was written back in, I think, 1996. They say in 2020 a major world event is going to uh, change everything and turn the world up on its head, and then there's going to be a major war. And they say every 80 years or so there's a major war. And if you go back historically, that is the record so far, at least in U.S. history. You got the World War II, you go back about 80 years in the 1940s. You got the Civil War 80 years before that in the 1860s. And then you go back 80 years before that, and you've got the War of the Revolution, the American Revolutionary War. And so, we're on the verge of another one of these major conflicts. And, the last one, World War II, the U.S. afterwards pretty much wound up on top, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. In fact, the last major world war, World War II, was the event that dethroned the British pound as the global world reserve currency. And that's how the dollar eventually worked its way into being the reserve. First through the Bretton Woods Agreement, where the rest of the world held the dollar and the dollar was backed up by gold. And then in 71, Nixon ended the gold standard and we're on this purely fiat standard. But that is probably going to come to an end in our lifetimes. I mean, I don't know exactly when that'll happen, but I would say, we'll probably see that in the next decade or so, maybe much sooner if we do get into this conflict. So back to the question of what price would I sell my silver maple leaf? Well, I'm very pragmatic about those things. I'm not sure what maple leaves are selling for right now. I think they have a bit of a premium, but let's say they're selling for $35. Well, I mean, I guess I'd sell my maple leaves for $36, and then I'd go buy some more back. But it's not because I want to get out of silver. I have no interest in exiting my silver position. So I would sell my silver maples. I'm not attached to these particular maples. They're just a commodity. They're made up of the same silver that's in any other maple leaf. So as long as there's silver available on the market, I would always sell my silver if it was worth the effort. If I was doing it on a scale large enough to make it worth my while. If I knew I could go back and buy them up for a lower price. So, you don't want to get too attached to your individual coins. Although I will say I'm a little attached to this guy, this 100-ounce Engelhard bar. I would sell it for the right price, but it's a pretty sweet bar. First 100-ounce bar. It's actually the only 100-ounce bar I own. I think that 100-ounce bars are a little bit impractical for most purposes, but they're so cool. So yeah, I'm kind of attached to that one. But most of my silver, I would not have any qualms about selling as long as it was for, above market price. But as far as reducing my exposure to silver, no interest in that. I'm still stacking. I'm still trying to get my hands on more gold and silver. And it's just part of the preparations, as we head into this uncertain time. You also want to make sure you have some food, some security, other things you might need. Personal hygiene products like those available over at Silver Botanicals. You can check them out with the link in the description if you're stocking up on your deodorants or mouthwash or any other personal hygiene products. I got some nice stuff over there. It's all powered by Nano Silver. Pretty amazing. There's a link in the description. You can use coupon code STACKER over there to save 10% on your order. Nickel stacking says, I used to have 23 100-ounce bars like that. Well, that's a lot of silver. I certainly don't have that many 100-ounce bars. I just have the one. Nickel stacking. Hey, if you're watching still, put it in the chat how many boxes of nickels you have. In fact, anybody out there who stacks nickels, give me a thumbs up down below and put in the chat how many boxes of nickels you have. Now, I don't have a ton. Storage space kind of at a premium for me. So if I had more space, I would have more boxes of nickels, though. There was that bill that was introduced recently to change the composition of U.S. coins. I know I'm kind of going off topic here, but that's kind of the fun part about live streams. It's just kind of a stream of consciousness sometimes. But I do think that nickels are a great coin to stack for the eventual collapse of the U.S. economy. And in some ways, It's even better than silver. Now, there's a lot of downsides to nickel, the primary one being that you have to warehouse this stuff and it's extremely heavy. But nickel coins right now, you can buy a box for $100. And when you do that, you've got about $123 worth of nickel and copper bullion because the nickel coins that they're minting right now are composed of 25% nickel, 75% copper. Poker Move says, I stacked Chad too. I think he meant to say Clad. Yeah, Clad. Chad, we're getting into the memes here. Any Chad stackers out there, give the video a thumbs up. But yeah, Clad coinage, I don't know. I guess if you're just hanging on to it, it's fine. I like nickels because you can actually get them for less than their metal content. Relative to their face value, they have the most melt value of any circulating coin, and you can stack them up in those nice boxes. Nickel stacking says Canadian nickels pre 1982 are 99% nickel. Yeah, if I lived in Canada, I would always be pulling those out of circulation. But my uh, impetus for stacking nickels is this. This is why I think they're one of the safest bullion investments. And now, hey, real quick, not financial advice. When I say it's safe, don't assume it's safe. Do your own due diligence. But when you get a box of nickels, okay, you spend $100 on it. That's what you buy it for at the bank because it's $100 face value. It's got about $123 worth of metal in it already. So you're already hedged against inflation. We know that there's a bill in Congress right now to remove that metal from that coin. So, yeah, right now, those nickels, I mean, you might have a hard time selling them, but I guarantee you that as soon as they switch over to like plastic nickels or whatever they make them into, steel, some cheap alloy, zinc, the kind of currencies that countries that go through hyperinflation to make, you can go find a lot of old currencies from European countries and stuff that were nickel, or rather not nickel, but zinc, and I don't know about plastic, but steel coins. That's what happens when countries go through hyperinflations, and that's what we're headed towards. As soon as they change the composition of those coins, all of the old nickels, the ones that we can still get our hands on, are going to go up in value significantly. And there's going to be a secondary market for them where you can sell them for more than their face value. This has already happened with pre 1982 pennies. And yeah, like half of the pennies minted in 1982 are copper, half are zinc. So whatever I say pre 1982, for all you sticklers out there, yes, 1982 and earlier in some instances, those pennies I think are worth about 2 cents each at their current melt value. And if you go on eBay and look for sold auctions, you can see that people sell them for like twice their face value routinely. And that is what is going to happen with nickels. And let's say we don't get hyperinflation. Let's say the economy's fine. Let's say we get a deflationary collapse. Well, the cool thing about nickels is they're never going to go below $100. So it's like if you're keeping cash at home as an emergency fund, why not keep some of that cash in the form of nickels? Because you're hedged against inflation and deflation. The only downside is that the things are so heavy, but hey, maybe you'll get stronger carrying them around. That can be part of your preps, lugging nickels around. You'll get real strong. Uh, but seriously, nickels to me, one of the safest ways to store money. Obviously, if you're looking to put, millions of dollars into something, maybe nickels aren't the way to go. Although Kyle Bass, he was the guy at Heyman Capital, the hedge fund. He bought like $1 million worth of nickels and put them in a warehouse, I think, back in 2011. I don't know if he still has those. He's been paying to warehouse them, but maybe that bet will pay off for him eventually too. Anyway, that pretty much sums it up today. Getting a lot of nice comments today. Thank you all very much for those of you who support this channel. I always appreciate the kind words in the comments or in the chat on these live streams. There's a lot of trolls in the comments too, but whatever. I like you trolls too. I like everybody who watches this channel. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I hope you've been enjoying these live streams. They are kind of fun, and I'll be doing more of those. But don't worry, there will be some regular videos too. This is not like the new format. I'll take some questions in the chat before we wrap this up if you want. Kaylin says, who says they will make new coins? They'll probably just go digital. Yeah, that's possible. They could get a CBDC if they want to eliminate the cost of minting the coins. And I will say this, when we get a CBDC, if they try to push a CBDC on us, they will definitely tout the savings from minting coins as one of the benefits. That is a forecast. Debt ceiling. Trombone Music says debt ceiling question mark. Yeah, the debt ceiling is going to be raised. That's what I would have to say about that. I don't know, what cuts will have to go along with that. I don't think there's going to be any real cuts. Maybe they'll say, yeah, we'll cut spending a couple years in the future, but there is definitely going to be an increase in the debt ceiling. There's no reason for them not to. Both parties love to spend money, and they only oppose the debt ceiling increases when there's a politician from the other party in office, and they all love the pork barrel spending. It's how they get reelected. It's how their special interests get paid at taxpayer expense. And the best part about our system today is taxpayers don't even really have to pay for anything because it's all financed via inflation, so we all pay the price. Scott says, I've got approximately 23,000 copper pennies and 5,500 Jefferson nickels. Well, that's a nice stack right there. I do save my old copper pennies. He says it's the cheapest way to invest in physical copper and nickel. Yeah, I will definitely say that as well. Don't buy copper bars, don't buy copper rounds. I mean, unless you just think they're cool, because there is something to be said for copper bullion and that it's neat. It looks cool. I have a big, I think 1 or 2 kilo copper bar. You've seen it in videos before. I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but it's very expensive to buy copper bullion. You're paying way more than the spot price. Whereas if you just go stack nickel coins, you're getting it for under spot price. Plus, it's legal tender, so it's a win-win. It's in coins. I mean, it's in the perfect barter format already. Tubes of coins. I mean, you really can't beat that. Trombone Music MS says, "Is silver better than gold?" You guys keep asking questions, and I'll keep going here, and then we're gonna wrap it up. Is silver better than gold? Well, it's different. It's different. It's very different. Silver is an industrial metal as well as a monetary metal. A lot of people have the idea that silver is no longer a monetary metal because, in the 19th century, silver was sort of de facto demonetized. And there's an interesting story behind that. I'm probably not going to get into it too much in today's video, but I'll cover it at some point in the future about why we wound up in the gold standard in the 19th century. And it was actually by accident. It was because Isaac Newton was running the British Mint, I guess, or the central bank or something like that. He was in charge of their bimetallic monetary standard, and he set the ratio incorrectly. So it created this arbitrage opportunity, which drained Britain of its silver. And they wound up with just gold because of this. And so they just went on a gold standard, and then they were the British Empire, and they were the biggest country, the biggest economy in the world at the time. And so everybody ended up going on the gold standard. And that's why we wound up with the ending of the bimetallic standard. But to answer your question, is gold better than silver? Is silver better than gold? I like silver because I think it's cheap right now. Gold is probably more well recognized as a financial asset, although silver is too to some extent. But as far as I know, central banks around the world, they're not stacking silver, they're stacking gold. And gold is viewed as a tier one asset. I don't necessarily know that silver is, but I like silver because it's a much smaller market. And when we revert to, kind of the historical use cases of silver as a monetary metal, if that happens, I think that there's a room for a tremendous amount of price appreciation relative to gold. Hey, Yankee stacking in the chat. Man, Yankee, love Yankee's videos with Tim. Those are some of my favorites. Shout out to Yankee Stacking, one of the best stacking channels on YouTube. A honor to have you in the chat here, sir. Mr. Urban World says, I used to think that platinum was more valuable than gold. Well, it used to be. Back in 2008 or so, platinum was valued higher than gold. The ratio has kind of reversed since that time. Platinum's kind of a weird thing. I mean, platinum, I've kind of mixed feelings about it. The BRICS nations control a lot of the world's platinum group metal production. So it could be that in the US, the price goes up drastically. We get some kind of a squeeze. However, one of the main uses for platinum is as a catalytic converter, and we're seeing the transition to electric vehicles. Now, whether you think that's because of the free market or because of the Great Reset and the elites' desire to force everybody to walk, that's kind of a topic for another video, but the world does seem to be heading in that direction. So that's a good thing for silver because you need a lot of silver to make electric vehicles, but you won't need as much platinum. But there's a lot of other things that platinum gets used for in industry too. It's a catalyst, also potentially useful in hydrogen energy. So, platinum, I like to have some platinum. I've got a couple ounces of platinum. I think it's a good thing to just have a little bit of just in case. We saw a huge spike up in the price of rhodium just a couple years ago, which is, to be fair, it's more scarce even than platinum. It's a platinum group metal, but it's even rarer than platinum. But we also saw a big spike up in the price of palladium following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, the choice between the metals, silver is what I focus on. I'm a smart silver stacker. Silver, I think, has a lot going for it. And it's got industrial uses. It's got there's a very limited supply of it. We had a huge silver deficit last year. A lot of it gets consumed by industry, which that's not the case for gold. I believe there's actually more physical gold available. It's hard to find the numbers for this stuff, because they've been mining gold and silver for thousands of years, and it's just kind of hard to say. It's not like anybody's been keeping track of it all along. There are some estimates and things, but a lot of silver has wound up in landfills, and it's unrecoverable at today's prices. That's a fact. Very little gold has been consumed that way. If you have a gold ring or a gold coin, there's a high probability that some of the gold in there was mined, hundreds or thousands of years ago. It could have been stuff that the Spanish plundered from South America, and it's just kind of been melted down and reused and sent back to the refinery over and over, and it's been treasured and hoarded. But a lot of the silver, it gets put into things like electrical contacts and solar panels and then cell phones in very minute quantities, but it's extremely useful as an industrial metal because it has the best conduction of heat and electricity of any metal on the periodic table. So there's really no substitute for it. And as we move into this kind of high-tech electrified economy moving forward, there's going to be a lot more demand for silver. Now, I've really gone on a lot of tangents on this video. The whole purpose of this video is just to illustrate that, the Fed doesn't have a choice. They're going to have to slash rates to save this drowning economy as we continue to see banks fail. And we're on the verge of World War III. That was what I was going to talk about in today's video. Now we're talking about electric cars and the chemical properties of silver. But I see more and more people popping in. So kind of hard just to wrap things up. But that is what I'm going to do. I have got to go. I hope that all of you have a fantastic weekend. Thank you all for tuning into another one of these live streams. These are a lot of fun. I enjoy doing them. We'll be doing them more as we go forward here in the future. And just hope you all stay safe. Happy stacking. Have a great weekend. And I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker out. If you have any more questions, put them in the comments below and I'll try to do a Q&A video. Thanks for watching, everybody.